In the 7th century BC, God had a prophet, and his name was Isaiah, and he said this, recorded in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 12. God has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand. Everyone lift up your hand for me. Does anyone know what the hollow of your hand is? The dead center, right? All the waters. Think about planet Earth. Think about all of the waters right there in the hollow of his hand. And then he continues to say, and he's marked off the heavens with a span. With a span. What is a span? Go ahead and lift your hand up again for me. A span is from your tip of your pinky finger all the way to the tip of your thumb. So go ahead and hold your hand up a little higher. I can't see all your hands. Right? So a span, the average span for us is about 8 inches, 7 to 9 inches. It depends if you're a man or a woman, but average span is about 8 inches. And so Isaiah says this, God has marked off the heavens with a span, the whole universe with a span of his hand. And so just for a moment, right, think about what God is saying about himself, how big, how great he is. The universe. Does anyone know how far the sun is away from planet Earth? It's a far, far away. I see a hand up. Thank you for that. 94 million miles. I know that's what you're going to say. 94 million miles away. Is that pretty far? I did a road trip down to Orlando a couple of different times. That's a pretty far trip, 1,100 miles about. Right? But 94 million miles. The next closest star outside of the sun, according to the Hubble telescope and scientists, it's 4.2 light years away. How far is a light year away? 6 trillion miles. That's 24 trillion miles away is the nearest sun outside of our sun, the nearest star. The Hubble telescope has apparently seen a star that's 28 billion light years away. So anyone want to do the math? 28 billion times 1 trillion. In math class, our new math teacher who we're going to be introduced to for middle school, maybe he can do the math for us. Right. Scientists say this right now. They believe that the universe spans 90 billion light years. So God said about himself that he has marked the heavens in his span, the universe in his span. Right. Great big God is where we're going to be this year at Trinity, and certainly where we have been for over 140 plus years together. But as Stephanie shared, Psalm 145, verse 3, great is the Lord, right? Large is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, right? A great God deserves great praise, a large praise, and his greatness, his majesty is unsearchable. That means even though he's shown us glimpses of himself, and certainly creation, the universe gives us a glimpse of his largest, he still says that he is beyond all of our imagination. He is God, a great God. So when we talk about greatness this year, and certainly in this moment, we'll describe it this. God's greatness is about his ascendancy over all of reality. Right? Greatness is about his eternal nature, his absolute power and authority, his all-knowingness, his godness. His godness. His goodness is about his morality, and certainly we lean into that, and I believe many of us know that, and I pray that we know that, but this year is about his greatness, and certainly in his greatness we begin to understand his goodness even more so, but this year is about his greatness. So my question for you and for myself is, how big is your God? How big is your God? It was 1300 BC, where God, loving all of his creation, saw part of his creation in slavery and bondage in Egypt, and all of a sudden he wants to save his people. We call that the Exodus, right? The book of Exodus, the 10 Commandments. We've seen the movie, right? 1300 BC, God rescues his children. He describes it as his pinky finger, doing these huge miracles, going up against false gods in Egypt, declaring that he is the one authoritative over all of those false gods that they are worshiping within those 10 plagues. Then he splits the Red Sea, and he provides for them in amazing ways, quail and manna, meat and bread. And all of a sudden he says, I do have a promised land for you because I need you to be the blessing to this whole world, and so I'm going to put you in the highway of the ancient world. So everybody is blessed by you as I bless you. And so he says, you need to go into this land. And so he says, send 12 spies. Send the best of the best out of the 12 tribes. And so they select the best of the best, these young men who have witnessed the pinky finger of God. And they go into the land and they see that it is amazing, that they are going to be blessed to be a blessing. And so they're excited. But yet 10 of the 12 say, but the people there are giants. Right? They call them the descendants of Anak and the descendants of the Nephilim. We don't know how big they were, but apparently there's some big people there, and they were scared of them. They're not going to let us come into this land. They're going to destroy us. In fact, we want to go back to Egypt. But two of the men there, Joshua and Caleb, many of us are familiar with them, they say, our God is big enough to handle this, and he's made a promise. He's going to fulfill this promise. There's nothing he can't do. But yet the whole nation, a whole generation heard about this small God, and instead of walking by faith in a great big God, right, they cowered, they put God in a box, and because of that, many of us know the story of what took place. They had to wander in the wilderness. They didn't get to enter the promised land. A whole generation suffered because they put God in a box, because they didn't believe in a great big God. And it was 1,300 years later, and many of us are familiar with the 12 disciples, right, in a relationship with Jesus. Right? And they see Jesus doing some amazing things. Right? He's casting out demons. Right? Not just one demon, but multitudes of demons. Right? He's healing sick people. People who were blind, he would touch them, they could see. People who couldn't talk, he touched them, they could speak again. People who couldn't walk, he touched their bone structure and they could walk again. People who had skin diseases, he would touch them and they would be healed. He'd be on the water with his disciples. There'd be huge storms and he'd just tell the storm to be quiet, to be still. And what would it do? It would respond to him. In fact, they saw Jesus raise dead people. People who were dead, done breathing for multiple days. Jesus would say, come forth, and they would breathe again. That's what they saw. But then they had a moment. Garden of Gethsemane, right, the day that we call Good Friday. They had Saturday, they had Sunday. Right? How big was their God? They turned away from him. They lost sight of his greatness, but then what did God do? What did Jesus do on Sunday morning? He rose again from the dead, saying, I am, in fact, who you thought that I was, who I said that I was, and I will always be. I am the great God, the eternal one. How great is your God? That's the question before us in this moment. The book of Colossians, we hear this about Jesus. Through Jesus, all things were created. Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead. That means he's the leader in the resurrection parade. He was the first to do it, and he will lead us into heaven, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all of his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. How big is your God? And is there really nothing that he can't do? Let that settle in. There wasn't just 3,300 years ago recorded for us in history where mankind fell into the temptation to have a small God and to live out of the smallness of themselves. This has been a temptation for you and for me also. And like a lot of us, right, great big God, right? We're outside. We see the great big God. But how big is he? I don't know what's going on in your life and your faith, but how big is he? Is there really nothing that he can't do? Some of us, right, feel like there's no joy. Right? Can God really bring joy into your life? This is a promise that he's given to you. Can he really do that? Can He really give you joy even in a world where there is sorrow, there are trials, but can there be true joy? Can He really give you peace? Peace in the brokenness of yourself and the brokenness of every relationship that you have. No relationship is perfect. In a body that is not perfect, can He truly give you peace? Can He give you love that He promises? Right? A sacrificial, a committed love, a love that doesn't walk away, a love that works through things as hard as it is. Can He give you that love? Is there really nothing that He can't do? And as I ask this question, maybe a better question might be, what is your giant? What is your giant that is making God little for you? Right? Maybe it is death. Maybe you've had a loved one pass and you're just in a state of grief and you don't know how to get out of it, and the giant of death is right before you. Right? Maybe it's a sickness, and that sickness is just getting the best of you, and you see a loved one who is just hurting, and you're praying for them. And that giant is right there in front of you. You can't see how God is working in and through that. Maybe it's a financial situation. That's your giant. Right? God, will you really provide? Maybe there's a broken relationship in your life. God, really, can you make amends to this? Can we reconcile? Can there really be forgiveness? What's your giant? Maybe it's a calling in your life. You've had a sense that God's calling you to make a decision to get out of your comfort zone, to live in your faith zone, but yet that giant, you just can't make that step. And God's calling you to make that step. And again, the question is there really nothing that He can't do? Maybe it's faithlessness. Maybe you were brought here in this moment and you just really struggle having faith at all, seeing God for who He is and believing. Maybe it's somebody in your life that just refuses and just continues to deny God and His authority and His supremacy and His creation. Maybe it's politics. Maybe that's your giant. Right? Where's God in the political mayhem of not just the United States of America, but in all of creation? Maybe it's sin. Maybe that's the giant to where you are stuck in grief, you are stuck in regret, you are stuck in a sorrow that just is not healthy. What's your giant? I'm going to ask that we would let God be God. Let God be God. Because we know that as big as that giant is, our God is bigger. Our God is bigger. I'm looking up in the sky right now. I don't know if anybody can spot an airplane. I see a bird over there. But go ahead. If there's an airplane in the sky, maybe you see it or not, how big would that airplane be? You can raise your hands just to help me out here. It'd be pretty small. But what's the truth? If you get closer and closer and closer to the airplane, how big is that airplane? Right? So how big is our God? My hope this year is that you and I can commit to get closer and closer and closer to Him. Yes, through worship. Yes, through devotionals, Bible studies, service, fellowship. There's so many different ways that we can get closer to Him, because the truth of our faith is the closer we get to Him, right, the bigger we see that He is. The bigger we see that He is. Our God, who said through Isaiah that He's marked the heavens with the span of His hand, He also said this about His hand: I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. I, the Lord your God, I hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, fear not. Fear not, I am the one who helps you. All right, people are watching. All right, they're looking at you and me. All right, we're called to be a blessing, to be a light in this world. And the question is what are they seeing in you and me? Will they see our faith? Will we live out of our own smallness, or will we live out of His greatness? I'm excited to open Psalm 145 with you all in this year. And what we're going to hear from the psalmist, and he repeats this, out of the greatness of God, he says, one generation shall proclaim his greatness to the next. Looking out at you, I think we have about 5 generations here. And the question is, will we not just pass our faith on to our generation, but to the next generation? Our God is great, and he is greatly to be praised. And there is nothing that he can't do. May he give you and I more faith to be the people that he's called us to be. In Jesus' name, I pray these things. Amen.